Hey, you! Officer Carter shouted as the window rolled down. Come here. Malik paused, a flicker of unease spreading through him. He pulled his earbuds out and looked up, trying to keep his voice steady. Yes, officer? Officer Carter's eyes narrowed as he leaned over and studied Malik for a moment, as if sizing him up. What are you doing out here? You're not from around here, are you? His voice was harsh, his tone accusatory. Malik stood tall, but inside, he felt a tight knot form in his stomach. I'm just heading home from school, officer. I live right down the street. Carter scoffed. Yeah, right. I've never seen you around here before. What are you really up to? This is a quiet town, and we don't need people like you causing trouble. The words stung, but Malik had heard them before in different forms. He wasn't surprised. He knew how some people in Pineview felt about him and others who looked like him. He had learned to navigate the subtle hostility, the sideways glances, the occasional muttered comment behind his back. But today felt different. There was something in Carter's voice that made him feel like this was no ordinary stop. I'm not causing any trouble, officer. I'm just trying to get home, Malik said, trying to keep his tone calm and respectful. Carter's expression darkened. I don't think you understand, he snapped. I'm not asking for your permission. Get over here. I need to see some ID. Malik felt a jolt of anxiety rush through him, but he didn't show it. His father had always taught him to stay calm in situations like this, no matter how unfair or uncomfortable. He reached into his pocket for his school ID, trying not to make any sudden movements. As he pulled it out, a small crowd began to gather on the sidewalk, watching from a distance. It wasn't unusual for people to stop and stare in Pineview, especially when a cop was involved, but the presence of onlookers only added to the pressure. Officer Carter grabbed the ID from Malik's hand and studied it for a moment, his eyes scanning it like he was looking for a reason to find fault. The tension between them was thick, palpable, as if the officer was searching for any excuse to escalate the situation. Malik could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, and he knew that the way this played out could determine how people would see him in the future, whether as a troublemaker or someone unjustly treated. Malik Thompson, Carter muttered, reading the name aloud. Your dad's Richard Thompson, huh? Malik nodded. Yes, sir, he's my father. A flicker of recognition passed over Carter's face, but it was quickly replaced by a look of disdain. He grunted. Well, that explains a lot. Malik wasn't sure what Carter meant by that, but he could feel the shift in the air. He wasn't just dealing with an officer of the law anymore, he was dealing with someone who had a personal issue with his family. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and he felt his body tense. Listen, Carter said, shoving the ID back into Malik's hand. I've been around here long enough to know that people like you don't belong in this neighborhood. Your dad, Richard, he's been a thorn in my side for years. Always causing trouble, always standing in the way of progress. And now here you are, acting like everything's fine. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what Carter was talking about. His father had always worked hard and kept to himself, never causing trouble. I don't know what you mean, officer. My dad's just a mechanic. He doesn't bother anyone. But Carter wasn't listening. His tone was growing more hostile with each passing second. I've seen your dad around town, always trying to stir up trouble with the police, always sticking his nose in things that don't concern him. I've got my eye on you too, Malik. You're no different. You're just like him. Malik felt his breath catch in his throat, his hands shaking slightly as he held the ID. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had known that there were people in Pineview who didn't like his father, but to hear it from a police officer, someone who was supposed to protect the community, was a bitter pill to swallow. I don't want any trouble, officer. I just want to get home, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Carter wasn't done. "Yeah, well, I don't think you're going anywhere anytime soon," he sneered. Just as things seemed ready to escalate, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What the hell is going on here?" Malik turned to see his father, Richard, walking toward him, his face filled with concern. Richard had always been a calming presence in Malik's life, a man who carried himself with quiet strength and dignity. But there was something different in his eyes today, something that made Malik realize that things were about to change. Before Richard could speak, Officer Carter raised a hand to stop him. "This doesn't concern you, Richard. Your son's been acting suspicious, and I'm just making sure everything's on the up and up." Richard's gaze hardened as he took a step forward, his voice low but commanding. "That's my son you're talking to, Carter. And you don't have any right to treat him this way." Carter took a step back, the mask of authority faltering for just a moment. "You always were the troublemaker, weren't you?" he muttered under his breath. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the animosity that had been simmering between Officer Carter and Richard for years. The tension in the air was palpable, and for the first time, Malik felt truly afraid. Not for his safety, but for the realization that the actions of one man, the man who had been so instrumental in shaping his life, were about to bring his entire world crashing down. As Malik's father stepped forward to confront Officer Carter, the crowd remained silent, waiting for the next move. The stakes had just been raised, and nothing would ever be the same. The tension that had filled the air moments before seemed to hang like a thick fog around them. Malik stood there, frozen, trying to process the weight of the situation. His mind was racing, his pulse quickening, and all he could hear were the words, "troublemaker," and "just like him." He felt as though the ground beneath his feet was slowly slipping away. The officer had taken a simple encounter, walking home after school, and turned it into something more, something dark and loaded with history that Malik had never been fully aware of. Richard, Malik's father, stood there, the only thing between his son and Officer Carter. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed the officer. "Carter, I don't know what your problem is with me, but you're not going to drag my son into it. He's a good kid, and he doesn't deserve this. Now, you're going to step back and let him go, or I'm going to make sure everyone here knows exactly how you've been treating him." For a moment, there was silence. Malik couldn't help but notice the way Officer Carter shifted, his shoulders tight with frustration. The power he usually wielded seemed to waver for a brief moment in front of Richard's unwavering stance. Carter wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Richard. In Pineview, Richard was seen as a pillar of the community, a mechanic who ran a successful business, a father who provided for his family. He was someone who had earned respect through years of hard work, and to have someone like Carter, a police officer no less, try to undermine that was something Malik never expected to see. But the silence was short-lived. Carter's face twisted into a sneer, a thin line of contempt stretching across his mouth. "You always did have a way with words, Richard. But you know what? Your son isn't fooling anyone. He's not as innocent as you think. I've been watching him. Watching both of you." The words hit Malik harder than he had anticipated. Watching them? Was he a target this whole time? What did Carter know about his family that would cause him to be so angry, so aggressive toward Malik? It was impossible to ignore the heavy sense of injustice that crept into Malik's heart. He had never done anything wrong. Yet, here he was, caught in a situation that seemed to be escalating with no way out. Richard's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the officer. "You're wrong, Carter. You've been carrying this grudge against me for years. I've worked my ass off to be a decent man in this town. And now, you want to use my son as some kind of scapegoat? You're not going to get away with it." For the first time, Malik saw the officer flinch, his bravado cracking, even if just for a second. Carter wasn't used to being confronted like this. Most people in Pineview just accepted things the way they were. But Richard's voice was like a slap in the face, firm, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. Carter's eyes flickered to Malik, and then back to Richard. You really don't get it, do you? You've been a problem in this town for a long time. I warned you before. You thought you could just walk away from it. But now, your son's got to deal with the consequences. Just like you did. The words were like a punch to Malik's gut. What was Carter talking about? Malik didn't have time to process it all, as the officer's voice continued to fill the silence, every word full of venom. I don't forget. You think just because you've been living here for years, all your past mistakes are forgiven? I know what you did, Richard. I know what you're really about. Malik felt the weight of the words sink into him, but he still didn't understand. What had his father done? What was this all about? His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his stomach tightening with frustration and confusion. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he was afraid that if he spoke, it would make things worse. His father's silence, on the other hand, spoke volumes. Richard was standing firm, his face set like stone, refusing to let Carter get under his skin. But Malik could see the flicker of something in his father's eyes, a flash of something dark and painful that he had never seen before. Richard finally spoke again, his voice low but full of quiet fury. You don't know anything about me, Carter. You never did. You're too busy living in the past, holding on to things that don't matter anymore. I'm not that man anymore. Malik could sense the weight in his father's words, the pain in the underlying truth. Whatever history they shared with Officer Carter, it wasn't something that Richard had ever wanted to revisit. But now, it seemed, it was coming to light whether anyone wanted it to or not. Carter took a step forward, his chest puffing up, but there was a hesitation in his movement. It was as if the words he was about to speak weren't just about Malik anymore, they were about something deeper, something personal. You've been a thorn in my side ever since you tried to ruin my career. Don't pretend like you didn't have anything to do with it. I lost everything because of you. And now you're going to let your son get away with this? He's just like you. A criminal in the making. The word, criminal, hung in the air like a dangerous spark. It was a label, a judgment, one that Malik knew would stick to him no matter what. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he felt as though the ground beneath him was giving way. He was being accused of something he didn't do, just like his father, it seemed. The thought of his reputation being torn apart by lies was almost too much to bear. But before he could react, something inside him shifted. He looked at his father, standing there resolutely, and for the first time, he understood why Richard had always been so distant. Why he'd kept his head down, why he'd always warned Malik to stay out of trouble, to keep his nose clean. It wasn't just about protecting himself, it was about protecting Malik from the world outside. The same world that saw people like them as problems, as targets. Richard's voice broke through his thoughts. You think I'm the one who caused your downfall, Carter? You think I'm the reason you're bitter and angry all the time? You're wrong. You did that to yourself. I chose the right path, and you chose to let your own jealousy consume you. Carter's face twisted into a mask of rage. You always had to play the hero, didn't you? I had the guts to make the tough calls, and you threw it all away. You think that makes you better than me? Richard shook his head slowly, his expression softening, as if he were tired of fighting. I didn't throw anything away. I just did what was right. And you can keep blaming me all you want, but deep down, you know that your problems have nothing to do with me. They have everything to do with you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, and Malik could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him or his father anymore. It was about years of resentment, of decisions made long before Malik was born. And now, it was all coming to a head. Officer Carter stood there, seething with anger, but something in his posture had shifted. The tension that had crackled between them for so long was starting to unravel, piece by piece. His shoulders slumped just slightly, as if he were realizing that the fight he had been carrying inside him for so many years was no longer as important as he thought it was. And in that moment, Malik felt something strange, a sense of clarity, of understanding. Malik stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stillness. "I'm not my father, Carter. I'm not the person you think I am. I just want to live my life without being judged for something I didn't do." The words hung in the air, their weight far heavier than Malik had anticipated. For the first time, it seemed as though Officer Carter was actually listening. His eyes flickered to Malik, and then to Richard. The rage in his face began to soften, replaced by something else, something almost like regret. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Carter's voice, now quieter, came as a reluctant surrender. "You think I don't know that? You think I want to be like this? But every time I see you two, I'm reminded of everything I lost. And it's hard to let go of that." Richard's voice was steady, almost empathetic. "I know it is. But you have to. For your own sake." The officer stood there for a moment longer, seemingly caught between anger and something else, before he finally turned and walked back to his cruiser. His footsteps echoed in the silence that followed, and as the car drove away, the crowd of onlookers began to disperse. Malik stood there, unsure of what had just happened. His mind was still spinning, the weight of the encounter too much to process. But one thing was clear, this moment would change everything. And for the first time, he realized that the fight for justice wasn't just about standing up to the system, it was about understanding the people who created it, the pain they carried, and the consequences of their actions. The days that followed the encounter with Officer Carter seemed to stretch on endlessly for Malik. What should have been a simple afternoon walk home had turned into a life-altering event, one that left him feeling raw and exposed. The conversation with his father, the heated confrontation with the officer, and the lingering tension in the air all weighed heavily on him. He couldn't shake the image of Officer Carter's angry face, the harsh words that had been exchanged, and the confusing sense of betrayal he felt. At school, Malik tried to act normal. He joked with his friends, worked on his assignments, and kept his head down, but the truth was, he couldn't focus. Every moment, every glance from someone in the hallways, felt like a judgment. He kept hearing Carter's words echo in his mind, calling his father a troublemaker, labeling him as someone who was no good for the town. And what had that meant for Malik? Had he inherited the same fate? Was he already being judged because of the sins of his father, someone he didn't even fully understand yet? The worst part was the feeling of powerlessness. Malik knew that the encounter with Carter wasn't just about him and his father, it was part of something larger, something systemic that affected everyone in their community, whether they realized it or not. Carter had never been just a bad cop. He was the embodiment of a broken system, one that seemed to hold people like Malik and his father accountable for crimes they didn't commit. People in power, people like Carter, could destroy lives without any consequences, simply because they had the authority to do so. Malik wasn't just angry at the officer, he was angry at the whole world that allowed men like him to thrive unchecked. At home, the conversation with his father hadn't been easy. After the incident, Richard had insisted that they sit down and talk. Malik knew it wasn't going to be a typical father-son discussion, but he didn't expect the weight of the conversation to be so heavy. His father had always been an enigma to him, someone who worked tirelessly to provide for their family, but who rarely spoke of his past. Malik had assumed it was simply because his father was a private man. But after that day, everything changed. Richard sat across from him at the kitchen table, his hands clasped together. There was a tiredness in his eyes, a deep well of emotion that Malik had never noticed before. He had always seen his father as a pillar of strength, someone who faced the world with quiet resolve. But now, Malik understood that strength wasn't about holding everything inside. It was about dealing with the brokenness, the things that tore at you from within, and finding a way to move forward despite it all. Malik, Richard began slowly, his voice low and measured, there's a lot about my past I haven't told you. I didn't want you to know. I thought if I just kept my head down, kept you safe, you wouldn't have to carry the burden of it. But that day with Carter, you saw something I didn't want you to see. Malik shifted in his seat, unsure of where this conversation was headed. He had heard snippets over the years, whispers from the town, but his father had always shut those conversations down quickly. What do you mean, Dad? Richard sighed, rubbing his face before continuing. Carter and I go way back. We weren't always enemies, but things changed. I made mistakes in my younger days, decisions that I regret. I didn't think they'd follow me forever, but they have. They followed me straight into my family's life. Malik listened intently, his heart pounding as he braced himself for whatever revelations were coming. What kind of mistakes? His father looked at him with a gaze that seemed to carry the weight of years of regret. Years ago, before you were born, I got involved in something I shouldn't have. It wasn't big, but it was enough to make me a target for certain people. Carter, he was one of the officers who was involved in the whole mess. I thought I could move on, but he didn't. He held on to it, blamed me for everything that went wrong in his life. And now, he's trying to use you to hurt me. Malik's mind was racing. He had always known his father had a complicated past, but he hadn't known it was so tangled with a person like Carter. So that's why Carter has been so angry at you? Malik asked, his voice cracking. All this time? Richard nodded slowly. Yes. He blames me for his own failures. And he's using you as a way to punish me for things that happened long before you were even born. He's made up his mind that I'm the reason he lost his job, lost his friends, lost everything. But the truth is, he lost those things because of his own choices. He chose to take the path of hate and resentment. I chose to move forward. Malik sat in stunned silence, absorbing the enormity of what his father was saying. He had always thought of his dad as just a hard-working man, someone who kept his nose clean, someone who didn't get involved in politics or drama. But now, he saw him in a new light. His father was a man who had lived through struggles he couldn't even begin to imagine, who had made hard decisions to keep his family safe, even if it meant carrying the weight of old scars. I never wanted this for you, Malik, Richard continued, his voice filled with emotion. I didn't want you to be caught in the middle of this fight. But now you're seeing what happens when you're part of a system that doesn't care about people like us. They don't see us as human, they see us as problems to be solved, obstacles to be removed. But we can't let that define us. We have to rise above it. Malik swallowed hard, his throat tightening as he felt a surge of emotion. His father was right. They could never let the hatred of people like Officer Carter define who they were. They couldn't let their lives be dictated by the prejudices of a broken system. But how? How could they stand against something so powerful, something that was built into the very fabric of their community? Malik's mind drifted back to that moment on the street when Officer Carter had called him a criminal, when he had been accused of something he didn't do. His chest tightened with the memory of those words. He had always been taught to play by the rules, to follow the law, to be a good person. And yet, here he was, standing accused of a crime he hadn't committed, not because of anything he had done, but because of the color of his skin and the mistakes of his father. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, but it was the world he had to live in. I don't know what to do, Dad, Malik whispered. How can we fix this? How can we stop people like Carter from hurting us? Richard reached across the table and placed his hand on Malik's. We fight back, son. Not with violence, not with hate, but with truth. We have to show them that we're not what they think we are. That we're not just their enemies or their problems. We're human. We're family. And we're not going anywhere. Malik looked into his father's eyes, seeing the determination and the resolve that had always been there but that had never been spoken aloud. In that moment, something inside Malik clicked. He didn't have to be afraid. He didn't have to let Carter's words or his past dictate his future. He had the power to stand up, to make a difference, to change the narrative. But it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. And it wouldn't come without consequences. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. Malik wrestled with his newfound understanding of his father's past, with the weight of the situation pressing on him from all sides. He didn't know which the right answer was, but he knew he couldn't let Carter win. He couldn't let the officer's hatred define who he was. He had seen the ugliness of the world, seen how easily it was to be judged and labeled for things beyond his control, but he also saw the love and strength that his father had shown him. And with that love, with that legacy of strength, Malik knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let fear control his life. He wouldn't be the victim in a story written by people who didn't understand him. He would write his own story. And he would fight every day to make sure that his father's past didn't define his future. The path ahead wasn't clear, but Malik knew one thing: he was ready to face whatever came next, not alone, but alongside the one person who had always believed in him, who had always fought for him. It was time to stand up, to be heard, and to show Pineview, and the world, that they couldn't break them. Not now. Not ever. In the weeks that followed, Malik began to understand the deeper, more insidious layers of the world around him. The simple acts of going to school, running errands, or even sitting at home felt different now. He felt like an outsider in his own town, as if the very walls of Pineview were closing in on him. He couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his stomach after that confrontation with Officer Carter. It wasn't just the officer's words or his father's revelations that haunted him. It was the understanding that the world was built on divisions that weren't always visible but were very real, divisions that left people like him and his father constantly on the defensive. At school, Malik found that nothing was quite the same. His friends acted like nothing had happened, but their awkward glances and the hushed conversations when they thought he wasn't listening made it clear that they were uncomfortable. It wasn't just the talk of the town about the incident with Officer Carter, it was the more insidious feeling that now clung to him like a shadow. People weren't just looking at him differently, they were judging him through a lens that wasn't his own. Their perception of him had changed, even if he hadn't done anything to earn it. Malik began to feel isolated in a way he never had before. His old friends, who used to laugh and joke with him in the hallways, now treated him with cautious respect. They didn't know what to say or how to act, unsure of how much of the town's prejudice they had unknowingly absorbed. It was clear that the rift between Malik and the people he had known his whole life was widening, and the pain of it gnawed at him. He found solace in his family, especially in his father, but there were moments when even Richard couldn't offer the kind of comfort Malik needed. The community, however, was where the true transformation took place. Word of the incident between Malik and Officer Carter spread fast. As small towns often do, Pineview quickly picked sides. People who had once smiled at Malik in passing now stared at him with suspicion, whispering about his father's past. The realization hit Malik like a tidal wave: he wasn't just a kid from a family that worked hard. He was now a symbol of something much larger, much more complicated. He had become a part of the story of this town, whether he wanted to be or not. At home, Richard did his best to shield Malik from the worst of it, but the weight of his own past and the repercussions of it pressed down on him. Every time the phone rang, there was a sense of dread in the air. The people who called were never friends, and the conversations never brought good news. Richard had always been the type of man who stayed out of politics, who focused on his family and work, and kept his mouth shut when the world got loud. But now, as the pressure mounted, he found himself pulled back into a fight he had hoped was long behind him. Malik could see the toll it was taking on his father. Richard had always been a man of quiet strength, someone who didn't show his emotions easily. But Malik could see the way his shoulders slumped after each phone call, the way his fists clenched when the past resurfaced. It was the first time Malik truly understood the weight of being a father, of wanting to protect your child from everything bad in the world, but knowing that sometimes, there was no way to shield them from the truth. The truth that your mistakes, your choices, and your past could come back to haunt you, even if you tried to bury them. Despite everything, Richard refused to back down. He kept talking to Malik, explaining how important it was to stay strong, to keep moving forward, and to never let the world's judgments define them. "You are not your mistakes, Malik," Richard would tell him, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You are not the person they think you are. You have the power to rise above it all. But you have to believe that you can." Malik wanted to believe his father, wanted to hold on to that hope that he could rise above the judgment and the hate that seemed to be closing in on him. But every day it got harder. He was constantly reminded that he wasn't just an individual in the eyes of Pineview. He was a reflection of his father's past, a past that had been twisted and distorted by years of resentment. And now, Malik was caught in the crossfire of it all. The tipping point came one Friday afternoon, a week after the incident with Officer Carter. Malik was walking home from school, trying to block out the constant whispers that followed him wherever he went. As he passed the local diner, he noticed a group of people standing outside, talking in low voices. The conversation stopped when they saw him, and the stares that followed made his stomach turn. He knew what they were saying. He could feel their judgment, feel the weight of their expectations. But he couldn't take it anymore. "Problem?" he asked, his voice loud enough for them all to hear. "What do you think you know about me? About my family?" The group was caught off guard. A few of them took a step back, clearly surprised by Malik's outburst. But one man, an older man with graying hair and a permanent scowl on his face, stepped forward. "We know enough, boy," he said, his voice low and condescending. "You're just like your father. Nothing but trouble." Malik could feel the rage bubbling inside him, the years of anger, confusion, and hurt coming to a boiling point. He wanted to shout, to scream at this man, to make him understand that he wasn't responsible for anything that happened in the past. But he held his ground, looking this man in the eye, refusing to let him see how badly his words had hurt. "You don't know anything about me," Malik said, his voice steady, even though his hands were shaking. "You don't know what it's like to have your life decided for you. You don't know what it's like to be judged by people who don't even know you." The group fell silent, and for a moment, it seemed like the world had stopped. The older man's face twisted into a sneer, but before he could say anything else, Malik turned on his heel and walked away. He didn't care what they thought anymore. He didn't care what anyone thought. He had had enough. The next few days were a blur. Malik stayed quiet, keeping to himself as much as possible. The confrontation with the group outside the diner had stirred something deep within him, something that he didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let the past dictate his future, and he wasn't going to let Officer Carter or anyone else define who he was. He would stand tall, even if it meant standing alone. The shift in Malik's perspective didn't go unnoticed. His friends, the ones who had been awkwardly avoiding him, began to approach him again. Some of them didn't fully understand what was happening, but they saw something in Malik, something that made them question the narrative they had been fed their whole lives. They saw that Malik wasn't just a kid caught in the middle of a feud, he was someone who had a voice, who had a right to tell his own story. But it wasn't enough to change the hearts and minds of everyone in Pineview. The rumors continued to spread. People whispered about Malik, about his family, about the secrets they didn't know. But Malik didn't care. He had learned that the weight of other people's opinions would never hold him down. His father's past had shaped him, but it would not define him. And slowly, as the weeks went on, Malik began to see the cracks in the world around him. The divisions weren't just about race or class or history. They were about power, about who got to control the narrative and who had to suffer for it. But Malik wasn't going to suffer anymore. He had a voice, and he was going to use it. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to happen overnight. But for the first time, Malik felt ready to face the world, not as a product of his father's past, but as a person in his own right. And that was something no one could take. As the weeks went by, Malik found himself on an unexpected path, one that was less about survival and more about finding his voice. Pineview hadn't changed overnight, nor had the town's deep-rooted prejudices magically disappeared, but Malik had begun to change. His sense of self, once so fragile, had grown stronger. He no longer felt like an outsider in his own skin. There was something unshakable in his stance now, a quiet resilience that slowly began to pierce through the thick layers of judgment that had previously clouded his world. The more Malik thought about the struggles his family had faced, the more he realized that his father's past wasn't just a burden, it was a testament to the resilience that ran through their blood. Richard had fought for years to provide a better life for Malik, to shield him from the things that had once broken him. And while Malik had resented that shield in the past, had wished his father would open up more about the past, he now understood why Richard had kept it hidden. The past had the power to destroy, to infect the present with its weight and its baggage. But now, Malik felt ready to face it head-on, to take what had once been a source of shame and turn it into strength. Despite this newfound determination, things in town had only worsened. The whispers grew louder, and the suspicion in the air seemed to seep into every corner of Pineview. Officer Carter, emboldened by the community's general lack of accountability, continued to target Malik, watching his every move with increasing hostility. Every time Malik stepped out of his house, it felt like he was under surveillance. Carter wasn't just angry anymore, he was personal. Every encounter felt like a challenge, an attempt to force Malik back into the box the officer had already built for him. Away from him. But Malik wasn't the same person he had been when he first encountered Carter on that street corner. Something had shifted inside him, a quiet, unspoken resolve. His father's words, his own realizations, and the endless moments of reflection had fused into a new sense of power. He was no longer going to back down. He would confront Officer Carter, but this time, not in anger or fear. He would confront him with the truth. It was late one evening when Malik's resolve was tested. He had stayed late at school to work on a group project, and as he walked home, the familiar tension of being watched settled into his chest. He was almost home when he saw the flash of headlights in the distance. Officer Carter's cruiser rolled slowly toward him, the engine humming ominously. Malik's pulse quickened, his mind immediately racing back to their first encounter. The officer's angry eyes, the accusations, the words that had torn into him, Malik could feel them all rising to the surface. The cruiser slowed as it reached him, coming to a stop just a few feet away. Carter's window rolled down, and the officer leaned out, his face a mask of annoyance. "You still walking these streets, boy?" Carter's voice was thick with contempt, but Malik stood tall, meeting his gaze head-on, refusing to let the officer see the tremor in his hands. "I'm walking home, just like anyone else," Malik replied, his voice calm but firm. His heart beat faster with every passing second, but he knew he couldn't back down. Carter's eyes narrowed, studying him for a long moment. "You sure about that?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. "You've been up to something, haven't you? Your father's the type to get mixed up in trouble. And now you're following in his footsteps. You're no different." The accusation hit Malik like a slap, but he refused to flinch. His voice was steady as he replied, "You don't know me, Carter. And you don't know my father. You're just making assumptions based on nothing but your own hate." Carter's jaw clenched, and for a brief moment, Malik saw the crack in the officer's composed exterior. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface was palpable. "You think I'm the problem here?" Carter growled. "You think it's me? You're no better than he was, and you're gonna end up the same way," just like everyone else in your family." Malik didn't give an inch. "I'm not my father," he said quietly but with undeniable conviction. "And you're not going to scare me into being something I'm not." For a moment, there was silence between them. The tension in the air was thick, and for a heartbeat, Malik thought Carter might lash out, that the officer might come at him with force. But then, without another word, Carter slammed his foot on the accelerator, the tires screeching as the cruiser sped off into the night. Malik stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the encounter pressing on him. But the next few days passed in a blur of contemplation. Malik found himself weighing the options before him. He had made it through that encounter with Carter unscathed, but he knew that the officer wasn't going to stop. And as much as Malik wanted to ignore it, the truth was undeniable: there was only one way this would end. He would have to fight back, not with his fists, but with his voice. He would have to expose the truth about what was happening in Pineview, the systemic racism that ran beneath the surface of the town, and the unchecked power of people like Officer Carter. But how could he do that? How could one person stand up against such deep-rooted hate? The question haunted him, but the answer was just as clear as the day he had first walked down that street. Malik wasn't alone. His father had shown him that much. There were others who were ready to stand up, to be counted, to speak out. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or oppressed by a system that favored power over justice. Malik began reaching out. He started talking to other students, people who had been affected by the same broken system, people who had seen the truth of what was happening but had been too scared to speak up. They had all been waiting for someone to lead the charge, to take the first step. And Malik was ready to be that person. It wouldn't be easy. There would be consequences, and the road ahead would be long. But for the first time, Malik felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been pushed to the margins of society, for every person who had been overlooked simply because of who they were. The next few weeks brought with them a change in the air, a sense of collective strength that Malik hadn't expected. His words, his courage, began to ripple through the community. People who had once been silent now began to speak out, to stand up for what was right. And Officer Carter, for the first time, seemed to feel the weight of that resistance. Malik had unknowingly sparked something in Pineview, a movement that challenged the very foundation of the town's racial divide. It wasn't going to be easy to bring change, but Malik had already begun to see the first glimmers of hope. The journey had only just begun, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. There was no going back now. The truth would come out, and with it, the hope for a better future. In the end, it wasn't just Malik who had changed, it was the whole town. People began to question their assumptions, their prejudices, and the way they had allowed the system to go unchecked for so long. And though the fight was far from over, Malik knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just his story. It was the story of every person who had ever been silenced. And together, they would find a way to rise above it all. The days that followed were a blur of determination, courage, and uncertainty. Malik's small act of defiance had ignited a fire in Pineview, a fire that couldn't be easily extinguished. The whispers that had once followed him now carried with them a different tone. Where there had once been disdain, there was now respect. Where there had once been isolation, there was solidarity. Malik had never imagined that one act of standing his ground could ripple out to change the lives of so many others. But change was never easy, and with it came resistance, division, and even danger. As Malik moved through the days, he could feel the shift in the town. He wasn't just walking down the streets anymore. He was walking in a place of growing importance. The air around him seemed to hum with a new energy, an energy that both excited and terrified him. People were noticing. Not just the town's residents, but also the outsiders, the people who had long ignored Pineview's struggles. News outlets started to take interest in the town's internal strife. They sought out Malik, hoping to catch a glimpse of the kid who had stood up to the system, but Malik wasn't ready for the public spotlight. He wasn't doing this for attention, and he didn't want his story to be reduced to headlines and soundbites. He wanted to make a difference, and the only way to do that was to keep the fight rooted in the heart of the community. At home, things weren't much easier. Richard had always been proud of Malik's growing strength, but the pressure of the situation was taking its toll. There were late-night conversations, hushed tones, and moments when it felt like they were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. Richard had been through too much in his life to ever want his son to face the same hardships. And yet, here Malik was, facing a world that was both cruel and complicated, a world that seemed to offer no easy answers. Richard tried his best to shelter Malik from the worst of it, but he could see the toll it was taking on his son. Malik had changed, but Richard had too. The weight of the past was pulling him down, reminding him of mistakes he had hoped to forget. The idea of his son taking on this battle alone filled him with fear, but Richard knew one thing: Malik wasn't alone. He wasn't alone anymore. One of the first to step forward and join Malik in this growing movement was his best friend, Jace. Jace had always been by Malik's side, though their bond had felt strained since the first incident with Officer Carter. Jace didn't fully understand everything Malik was going through, but he understood enough to know that his friend was fighting for something bigger than himself. The moment Malik had stood up to the officer on that dark street, Jace had known that the fight was inevitable. He couldn't stand on the sidelines. He had to stand with Malik. What happens next? Jace asked one evening, sitting across from Malik at the diner. The two of them had been spending more time together lately, strategizing, trying to figure out how to make real, lasting change in Pineview. But even as they spoke about the future, Malik could sense the uncertainty in Jace's voice. Malik sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, man. I really don't." His fingers drummed nervously against the table. "But I know we can't just sit back and let things keep going the way they have. This town has a lot of people who are just waiting for someone to lead them." "Yeah," Jace nodded. "But we can't do this on our own. It's bigger than just us. This isn't a battle we can win by ourselves. If we want change, we need to get everyone on board." Malik nodded, but even as he agreed with Jace, he knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The forces at play here, racism, systemic inequality, ignorance, and fear, had been entrenched in Pineview for generations. It wasn't just about making speeches or rallying people. It was about confronting decades, if not centuries, of history, and that kind of change didn't come overnight. The next few weeks were filled with organizing, speeches, and late-night discussions. Malik, Jace, and a handful of other students began meeting after school, brainstorming ways to push back against the system that had allowed Officer Carter's behavior to continue unchecked. They started small, holding quiet gatherings in local parks, meeting in secret to discuss strategies, and sharing stories of their own experiences with racism. Slowly, the movement gained momentum. More and more people, especially young people, began to come forward. They stood together, knowing that strength lay in numbers. But there were setbacks. Not everyone was supportive. The older generations of Pineview, those who had long held power and privilege, began to take notice. The town's leaders, those who had long turned a blind eye to the issues within their community, started to push back against the growing movement. It wasn't just that they didn't want to acknowledge the truth, they feared what it would mean if things changed. They feared losing their grip on the town's history, its identity, and its traditions. They feared that if the young people like Malik got their way, the town they had built would crumble under the weight of their demands for justice. One afternoon, as Malik and Jace were walking through the town square, they were met with an unexpected confrontation. A group of older men, familiar faces from the town's council, stood in their path. The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment, Malik thought about turning around. But something inside him urged him to stay, to face them head-on. "You think you can just come in here and change everything?" one of the men, Mr. Dwyer, sneered. "You don't know anything about this town, boy. You don't know what it took to build it. You don't know the sacrifices people like me made." Malik stood tall, refusing to back down. "I know enough. I know that the system you've built isn't working for everyone. I know that people like me, people like my father, have been kept down for too long." Mr. Dwyer chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. "Your father? Your father was a criminal, and you're no different. You think people are going to listen to you? You think they're going to let you tear down everything they've worked for?" The word stung, but Malik didn't flinch. "I'm not tearing anything down. I'm asking for change. I'm asking for equality. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm more than the sum of my father's mistakes." The group of men exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to respond. But Mr. Dwyer's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smirk. "You'll learn, boy. You'll learn that people like you don't change things. You'll never win." With that, the men turned and walked away, their laughter echoing behind them. But Malik stood firm. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew that there would be many more people like Mr. Dwyer, people who would resist every step of the way. But he also knew that change was coming. It had to. In the weeks that followed, the town grew increasingly divided. People began to choose sides, some standing with Malik and his friends, others clinging to the status quo. But Malik refused to back down. With each new challenge, he found more strength. And with every step forward, he could feel the momentum building. The truth had come out, and it wasn't going to be silenced again. By the time the town council scheduled an emergency meeting to address the growing unrest, Malik and his group had already planned their next move. They were ready. They were prepared. And no matter how hard the fight was, Malik knew one thing for certain: it was a fight worth having. Change had begun, and there was no turning back now.